The weird truth is the most compelling consumer agent right now remembers you by scribbling into a markdown file. And that might be the right idea. Welcome to X-Pulse Digest. This comes from Stripe's podcast with Bret Taylor, now CEO of Sierra and chairman of the OpenAI board. You'll hear why the janky solutions sometimes win, and why the real AI productivity story might be about processes, not people. A lot of the recent AI wow factor is coming from coding agents, and Bret has a technical explanation for why that domain got good so fast. Codebases are robot-friendly by accident. The context is mostly in one place, mostly text, and changes get tight feedback loops, compile errors, unit tests, integration tests, plus a formal history and code reviews. So when people see a coding agent cruise, they extrapolate. If it can do this, it can do every other digital task. Maybe. But Bret doesn't buy the straight-line jump to messier work like writing an annual letter where sources are scattered across systems and half the context lives in people's heads. Then he lands the bigger point. Maybe software engineering was structured like this because humans needed it. But now it's also structured like this because agents thrive on it. Which sets up the uncomfortable question. If agents like code repo structures so much, do we start reshaping everything else to look like a repo? That markdown file memory hack in OpenClaw looks silly until you compare it to the mainstream experience. You can open a fresh Gemini or ChatGPT chat, and it's basically a blank slate. Meanwhile, a semi-rogue project is passing notes to itself like Memento, and it feels more personal. Bret's twist is that this isn't just a hack. A directory of everything you've done, in files you can grep, might be an efficient memory system for an agent. You want a mix of context you can load and details you can jump to. And there's a practical reason this terminal-centric approach keeps working. Agents already know the Unix toolchain, so you get leverage without a new stack. The provocative version is simple. The future might look less like elegant multi-agent diagrams and more like a messy folder full of durable context. Once you see agents as workers, the interface changes. A traditional SaaS app has the web dashboard for humans and the API for computers. Bret's question is whether there's a third thing that becomes the main event, an agent harness. Think about the best Stripe expert in the world. Not just the endpoints, but the rules, documentation, and the when to flip which switch context. That's what a harness tries to package for agents. Bret is skeptical that the future is just a pile of MCP servers and sub-agents. Those architectures look great on a whiteboard, but often fail in practice. Stuff all the context into sub-agents, and the orchestrator sounds robotic because it doesn't understand the why behind the tools. There's also a what's old is new again vibe. The agentic wave is reviving desires like, I want a SSH into my Stripe account, so you can tail logs and pipe output. Then, Bret drops a real-world counterexample that makes protocol debates feel almost academic. At Sierra, Bret sees agent adoption where the infrastructure is 100 years old. Healthcare is full of payers, providers, pharmacies, PBMs, and everyone calls everyone. And now some of those calls are being picked up by AI agents. Here's the part that sticks. They're not switching to the agent language. It's English over the public switched telephone network, TCP/IP, and English over PSTN, as he put it. It reinforces a point Bret referenced. There's a race between companies making everything agent accessible via new APIs and harnesses versus agents just getting better at using existing desktop web and legacy interfaces. Bret's take isn't that old rails are the long-term answer. It's that AI can operate through text, audio, and computer use, so you get value before the last mile is rebuilt. Still, he thinks the best future experience is a purpose-built harness, not a gorgeous dashboard for humans. All of this lands in one place. Sierra is trying to become the branded agent customers actually talk to.
Sierra builds AI agents for customer experience. They can replace IVR and pick up the phone, run digital chat, and take actions, not just answer questions. The growth numbers are striking. Bret said Sierra hit $100 million in ARR in 7 quarters, $150 million in 8 quarters, and is around $165 million 1 month into the next quarter. Adoption usually starts narrow. One channel, a few use cases. In healthcare, phone is dominant, so companies start by letting an agent handle certain call types and measuring customer satisfaction. More digitally native businesses start with chat. But most clients end up doing both, and Sierra is pushing toward a unified, one agent across everything model. A glimpse of where this goes is Rocket Mortgage. On Redfin, you can search for a home with an AI agent, and on Rocket.com, you can originate and service a mortgage with an AI agent. That's product usage, not just support. And the economics are the accelerant. If a $10 or $20 phone call becomes cents, whole categories of customer experience stop being a cost center you hide behind a maze. The second-order effects get weird fast. A lot of people assume the story ends at cost savings. Sierra does see heavy automation. Bret mentioned Ramp automating 90% of cases, and many clients landing in the 70 to 90% range. But the more interesting part is what happens to the remaining human work. The cases that reach a person get more complex, so handle time can go up. One client even saw call center agent satisfaction rise because it's more fulfilling to solve hard problems than repeat the same script. Then there's the volume effect. A retailer improved the experience so much that customer conversations went up 2 or 3 times. The cost didn't really drop, but the CEO was thrilled because they were finally listening at scale. That's basically Jevons' paradox in customer service. Bret's competitive framing is sharp. If everyone can launch AI, it stops being an advantage and becomes an imperative, like having a website. In competitive markets, it turns into consumer surplus, reinvestment, or churn reduction. So the differentiator shifts, not whether you have agents, but how well your agent works in the messy reality of a big brand. Which raises a tricky engineering question. How do you stop an agent from acting like it already knows the answer when it really needs to look it up?
Sierra's approach to reliability isn't just prompt better. Bret described what they call a constellation of models. Clients configure goals and guardrails inside their agent studio, not a brittle step-by-step script, because you want agency within boundaries. Under the hood, reasoning models do the work, and supervisor models inspect that reasoning. If the agent goes off script, a supervisor can send it back with notes and force a redo. Bret's intuition is simple. If one system is right 90% of the time, and a supervisor is also right 90% of the time, chaining them can get you to roughly 99% effectiveness. There's also a grounding problem. With a famous brand, the model can get overconfident and start answering from vibes. The guardrails force it to consult policy and data. Building like this today is strange because so much gets thrown out as model capabilities improve. Bret expects today's differentiators to get commoditized, so you have to be willing to ship, then delete. And that same philosophy shows up in Sierra's business model.
Sierra is pushing outcomes-based pricing. In customer service, if the AI resolves the case without human intervention, there's a pre-negotiated rate. If it escalates to a person, that's free. In sales, Bret framed it more like a commission. He draws a line between outcomes-based and usage-based. Tokens, in his view, aren't reliably correlated with value. He compared it to measuring programmers by lines of code. Outcomes-based pricing flips the incentive. Reducing token usage for the same outcome becomes Sierra's problem, not the customer's. And when you only get paid for outcomes, you have skin in the game to help clients cross the last mile, even when it's boring, messy work. Bret admits it's not easy everywhere. Customer service has a clear resolved or not line. Product usage is fuzzier. Still, he likes the question it forces. Not, how much did you use, but, did this agent actually move the business? That leads to the most quietly radical idea in the whole conversation. AI productivity isn't about replacing a role. It's about collapsing a process. Bret's theory is that the atomic unit of AI productivity is a process, not a person. AI will be great at preparing you for a meeting and terrible at getting you a cup of coffee, at least without robotics. So thinking in terms of jobs replaced is kind of nonsensical. Instead, picture a mundane workflow like onboarding a new supplier. Legal does the contract, procurement negotiates, IT onboards them, the business sponsors it. If it takes 17 days, a CEO could plausibly aim for 17 hours by redesigning that end-to-end path with AI. The problem is, most companies aren't organized around that. They're organized around departments. So they install copilots by department and call it transformation, but nobody owns the full journey. His point about legal is concrete. Building a general AI redlining tool is a broad science problem. Automating contracting for one narrow supplier domain with rigid rules and clear exceptions is closer to engineering. Narrow the domain, build a harness, automate most of it, and route the weird 10% to humans. That's also why Bret is bullish on applied AI companies. Even if model development paused, there's still massive value sitting in implementation, which creates a strange implication for how we build companies. If software is suddenly plentiful, who becomes the most valuable person in the room? The job role Bret keeps circling is a kind of product engineer, someone with taste, enough infrastructure intuition to debug reality, and deep customer understanding. With tools like Codex, that person can produce capital P products with surprising autonomy. This is also a bet on generalists. Traditionally, as companies scale, specialists win, and the jack of all trades gets sidelined. Bret wonders if agents reverse that, because the generalist finally has leverage. They don't need to be the deepest CSS person or the deepest distributed systems person if they can direct the system and judge the output. One detail that felt honest is his own friction. He's trying to get to a world where he's not writing code, and he finds it hard. The tools make people more productive, and oddly, they can make you work harder because it's addictive to realize how much you can ship. The conversation ends in two very different rooms Bret has been in. One was the public chaos of the Twitter board during Elon Musk's takeover. The other is the unusually mission-heavy world of OpenAI's board. On Twitter's board during the takeover, the main thing Bret learned was personal. He didn't enjoy the conflict or the public spotlight. He likes building things people use, and enterprise software suddenly looked pretty relaxing. At OpenAI, he joined after the crisis around Sam's firing, brought in as a mediator both sides agreed on. What surprised him most wasn't drama. It was sitting inside a real research lab for the first time, watching researchers trying to make safe AGI, and finding it hard to leave those meetings cynical. The other surprise is governance. It's his first not-for-profit board, and the fiduciary duty is to a mission, not shareholders. The sole duty, as he put it, is to ensure AGI benefits humanity. As for predictions for 2026, he expects broader adoption of agents beyond niche hobbyists,
And he offered a bold one that now sounds weirdly plausible. Most Silicon Valley companies won't write code by hand. If that's true, the question stops being whether you can produce software. It becomes what you choose to build, what you choose to automate, and whether you can package the context well enough that an agent can actually behave like it understands you. If you want the full texture of these ideas, including the Sierra examples and the OpenAI board perspective, find Bret Taylor on Stripe's podcast.